Lieutenant Jake Morrison stood at the viewing port of Unity Station, watching the stars beyond the thick glass. He had been stationed here for 2 years now, and the sight never got old. Ships from 100 different worlds came and went, their designs as varied as the species that built them. Some looked like living creatures, all curves and flowing lines. Others were sharp angles and cold metal. Earth's ships were somewhere in between, practical and sturdy. Jake's reflection stared back at him from the glass. He was 32 years old with brown hair that never quite stayed in regulation style, and a face that smiled easily. Most people on the station knew him as the friendly human, the one who told jokes in the mess hall and helped new arrivals find their way around. He liked it that way. "Still watching the ships, Jake?" A voice called from behind him. He turned to see Dr. Sophie Blake approaching, carrying a datapad and wearing her usual white lab coat. Sophie was a year younger than him, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and bright green eyes that seemed to find wonder in everything. She studied alien life forms, spending her days in the xenobiology labs trying to understand how different species evolved on different worlds. "Just taking a break," Jake said. "What about you? I thought you'd be elbow-deep in sample containers right now." Sophie laughed. "I needed air, or whatever passes for air in this recycled atmosphere. Sometimes I forget what real wind feels like." They stood together at the viewing port, comfortable in the silence. Jake and Sophie had become close friends since arriving at Unity Station. In a place where humans were outnumbered 50-1, it helped to have someone from home to talk to. The corridor around them was busy with afternoon traffic. Tall, gray-skinned Aldarians walked past in their flowing robes. A group of 4-armed Pentari rolled by on their lower appendages, speaking in their clicking language. 2 Krenth soldiers marched through, their reptilian scales gleaming under the station lights. They wore armor even here where weapons were supposedly forbidden. Jake noticed the Krenth giving him a long look as they passed. One of them said something to the other in their hissing language, and both laughed. Jake's smile never wavered. He had learned early that reacting to insults only made things worse. "They're getting bolder," Sophie said quietly once the Krenth had moved on. "Just talk," Jake replied. "Nothing we haven't heard before." "I know, but sometimes I wonder if we're making it worse by not pushing back." Jake shrugged. "We follow orders. Earth wants us to be diplomatic, so we're diplomatic. Eventually they'll get used to us." Sophie didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. They had this conversation before, and it always ended the same way. Humans were the newcomers here, the junior members of the Galactic Council. It was better to bend than to break. The intercom chimed, and a voice announced that the council assembly would begin in 30 minutes. Jake sighed. He was Earth's junior representative, which meant he got to sit through long meetings where older, more established species debated policy. Mostly he just listened and voted the way Ambassador Paul Chen told him to vote. "Another thrilling afternoon of galactic politics?" Sophie asked with a sympathetic smile. "You know it. Today we're discussing trade routes through the Hesper sector. I expect at least 3 species to threaten war before we break for dinner. Try not to fall asleep. No promises." Jake made his way to the council chambers, a massive circular room at the heart of Unity Station. The ceiling was a dome of transparent material that showed the stars above. Seats were arranged in rings with the most powerful species closest to the center, and everyone else spreading outward. Earth seats were in the 4th ring, behind the Krenth, the Vextar, and the Aldarians. Ambassador Chen was already there, reviewing notes on his personal display. He was a man in his 60s with gray hair and a patient face that rarely showed emotion. He had been a diplomat for 40 years, the last 10 spent dealing with alien species. "Jake," he said with a nod. "Ready for today's entertainment?" "Always, sir. Earth is requesting a colony world today. Small planet, unclaimed system, plenty of resources. Should be straightforward." Jake took his seat as other delegates filed in. The chamber filled with the sounds of a dozen different languages, all being translated through earpieces into something each species could understand. The technology was impressive, even if it sometimes struggled with idioms and cultural context. The session began with the usual formalities. The council speaker, an ancient Aldarian named Melthros, called the assembly to order. Minor business was handled first. Votes on regulations that would affect maybe 3 species out of the 100 in the council. Jake voted when Earth's turn came, following Chen's lead. Then came Earth's request. Chen stood and made his presentation. He was good at this, Jake had to admit. He spoke clearly and calmly, laying out Earth's proposal for a colony on a planet they had designated New Vancouver. The world was in an unclaimed system, far from any established territories. It had water, breathable atmosphere, and no native intelligent life. Perfect for human colonization. We believed this world would be an ideal location for expansion, Chen concluded. It would allow humanity to contribute more to the Council's scientific efforts and increase our self-sufficiency. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then Commander Vexcor of the Krenth Empire stood. He was massive even for his species, nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales with yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. He wore the full armor of a Krenth military commander, complete with medals and rank insignia. A colony world, Vexcor said, his voice a deep rumble that the translators turned into cold, precise words. The humans want a colony world. That is correct, Chen replied evenly. Vexcor laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. And what will you do with this world, humans? Build farms? Write poetry? Perhaps you will establish a university where you can study the cultures of real warriors. A few other delegates laughed. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his face neutral. Chen showed no reaction at all. We will build homes, Chen said. We will raise families. We will conduct research and contribute to the Council's knowledge base. And when raiders come, Vexcor pressed. When pirates decide your soft little world would make a good target, what will you do then? File a complaint? Ask them politely to leave? More laughter. Jake noticed other species watching with interest. Some looked sympathetic, others amused. None looked like they would speak up in Earth's defense. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Perhaps you're right, Commander. We should consider the Council's concerns more carefully. Earth withdraws its request at this time. We will resubmit when we have addressed the security questions raised here today. Vexcor smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Wise decision, human. Know your limitations. The assembly moved on to other business. Jake sat in his seat, hands folded in his lap, face calm. Inside he was burning, but this was what Earth wanted. Stay calm, be diplomatic. Don't make waves. After the session ended, Jake found Sophie waiting outside the chambers. She took one look at his face and said, That bad? They laughed at us, Jake said quietly. Chen withdrew our colony request because Vexcor suggested we couldn't defend it. Could we? Jake looked at her. What do you think? Sophie didn't answer. They both knew the answer. Earth could defend a colony. Earth could defend a dozen colonies. But that wasn't the role humanity had chosen to play in the Council. They walked back through the station corridors together, surrounded by species that thought they knew what humans were. Peaceful, gentle, tame. None of them knew the truth. Not yet. 3 weeks passed after the Council assembly. Jake went about his duties, smiling at the right times, keeping his opinions to himself. He filed reports, attended meetings, and represented Earth with the patience that was expected of him. But something had changed on Unity Station, something subtle but growing. The Krenth military presence had increased. Jake counted 15 new soldiers in their distinctive dark armor, walking the corridors in groups of 3 or 4. They seemed to be everywhere now, watching, waiting. Other species gave them wide berth, and Jake understood why. The Krenth had a reputation. They were the Council's muscle, the ones called in when diplomacy failed and force was needed. There had been incidents. Small things at first. A human technician shoved aside in a corridor. A human supply officer told to wait, while Krenth personnel took what they wanted from the commissary. Each time, the humans involved filed official complaints through proper channels. Each time, the complaints vanished into the station's bureaucracy with no action taken. Jake mentioned it to Ambassador Chen during their weekly briefing. I'm aware of the situation, Chen said, not looking up from his reports. We're monitoring it. Sir, it's getting worse. Yesterday, 3 humans were denied access to the recreation deck because Krenth soldiers claimed they had reserved the entire facility. Did they have a reservation? No, sir. But station security backed them up anyway. Chen finally looked at him. His face was tired. What would you have me do, Lieutenant? Start a diplomatic incident over a recreation deck? We're building something here, slowly. Sometimes that means swallowing pride. Jake wanted to argue, but he knew it would do no good. Chen was following orders from Earth, and those orders were clear. Don't make trouble. Don't give the Council reasons to marginalize humanity further. Be patient, so Jake was patient. even when it hurt. Sophie was working late in her lab that evening. She often did, preferring the quiet of the station's night cycle when fewer people were around. Her current project involved comparing protein structures across different species, looking for common evolutionary patterns. It was detailed work that required concentration. She was alone in the xenobiology wing, the only occupied lab in a corridor of darkened rooms. Her security badge gave her 24-hour access, and she used it frequently. The station's AI knew her patterns, tracked her movements as it tracked everyone, filed her location in its vast databases. At 2300 hours station time, Sophie saved her work and began shutting down her equipment. Her eyes were tired from staring at molecular displays, and her back ached from hunching over the lab table. She packed her datapad, sealed the samples she had been working with, and headed for the door. The corridor outside was empty and dimly lit. Night cycle illumination was kept low to simulate planetary darkness, helping species with circadian rhythms adjust to station life. Sophie's footsteps echoed on the metal floor as she walked toward the main lift that would take her to the residential levels. She was halfway to the lift when 3 figures stepped out from a side corridor, blocking her path. Krenth soldiers. Sophie recognized the one in the center immediately. Commander Vexcor, the same one who had humiliated Ambassador Chen in the council chambers. He was even larger up close, his scales reflecting the dim lighting like polished stone. The 2 soldiers flanking him were slightly smaller, but no less intimidating. "Dr. Blake," Vexcor said. His voice came out as a hiss translated into English by her earpiece. "Working late, Commander," Sophie replied, keeping her voice steady. "Excuse me, I need to get past." She tried to step around them, but Vexcor moved to block her path. His soldiers mirrored the movement, forming a wall of armored reptilian bodies. "Why the hurry?" Vexcor asked. "We so rarely get to speak with humans one-on-one. Usually you travel in groups like prey animals." Sophie's heart was beating faster now. She was alone in an empty corridor with 3 Krenth soldiers, no witnesses, no help nearby. But she kept her face calm. "I'm tired, Commander. I'd like to go to my quarters." "Tired," Vexcor repeated, as if tasting the word. "Humans are always tired." "Tired, weak, soft. I wonder why the Council even accepted your species. What do you contribute besides complaints and requests? If you have concerns about Earth's Council membership, you should address them through official channels." Vexcor laughed, that grinding rock sound Sophie had heard in recordings of the assembly. "Official channels. Forms and procedures. This is why your species will never matter. You hide behind rules because you lack the strength to stand without them." He stepped closer. Sophie stepped back, her shoulders hitting the corridor wall. Vexcor leaned down, his massive head level with hers. She could smell something like hot metal coming from his scales. "Tell me, Dr. Blake, what would you do if someone broke your precious rules? If someone decided that human fragility was an invitation rather than a shield?" Sophie's hand moved to her wrist, where her emergency beacon was built into her station ID bracelet. Every member of the station crew had one. Press it twice and it would broadcast a distress signal to security and to designated emergency contacts. She pressed it twice. Vexcor's eyes tracked the movement. His expression changed, the mockery replaced by something colder. "You just made a mistake." His clawed hand shot out and grabbed Sophie's arm just above the bracelet. His grip was crushing and she felt his claws pierce her skin. Pain shot up her arm as he squeezed harder. "Let go," Sophie said, trying to keep her voice level. "You're hurting me, am I?" Vexcor pulled her away from the wall, his strength casual and terrifying. "How fragile you are. Like an insect. One squeeze and you would break." Sophie tried to pull free, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The other 2 Krenth soldiers moved closer, encouraged by their commander's actions. One of them reached out to touch her hair, his claws combing through the blonde strands. "Please," Sophie said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "Don't do this." Vexcor's response was to throw her against the wall. The impact drove the air from her lungs and sent bright pain through her shoulder. She heard something crack in her left wrist as she tried to catch herself. She slid to the floor, gasping. "You summoned help," Vexcor said, standing over her. "Let's see what your tame friends do when they arrive. Perhaps they'll file a complaint." The soldiers laughed. Sophie tried to stand, but her wrist wouldn't support her weight. She looked up at Vexcor, at the contempt in his yellow eyes, and understood that this was about more than her. This was about testing limits, about seeing how far the Krenth could push before humans pushed back. She didn't have to wait long for an answer. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, rapid and purposeful. Jake rounded the corner at a dead run, still in his duty uniform. His face was calm, but Sophie knew him well enough to see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were held loose at his sides. He stopped 10 feet from the Krenth soldiers, taking in the scene. Sophie on the floor, blood on her arm, her wrist bent at a wrong angle, Vexcor standing over her with that same sneer he'd worn in the council chambers. "Lieutenant Morrison," Vexcor said. "How prompt. Your female sent a distress call. We were just having a conversation about human weakness." Jake's eyes moved from Sophie to the commander. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Step away from her. Or what?" Vexcor's smile widened. "You'll file a complaint? Schedule a diplomatic meeting? Perhaps you'll ask me politely to respect human dignity." One of the other Krenth soldiers said something in their language. Both subordinates laughed. Vexcor didn't take his eyes off Jake. "This is your chance," Vexcor continued. "Show me I'm wrong about humans. Show me you're more than soft words and empty pride. Do something." The corridor was silent except for Sophie's ragged breathing. Jake stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Jake moved. What happened next took less than 5 seconds. But Sophie would remember every detail with perfect clarity for the rest of her life. Jake closed the distance to the first Krenth soldier in 2 strides. His hand struck the soldier's weapon arm at the elbow joint where the armor had a gap for mobility. The sound of breaking bone was sharp and clear. The soldier's weapon clattered to the floor. Before the first soldier had finished falling, Jake was moving to the second. This one tried to raise his arms in defense. Jake swept his legs, putting him on the ground, then delivered a precise strike to the base of his skull. The soldier went limp. Vexcor finally reacted, reaching for his plasma sidearm. But Jake was already there, inside his reach. He grabbed the commander's arm, twisted, and the weapon fell free. Another strike, this one to Vexcor's knee joint, and the massive Krenth went down. Jake stood over the commander, his breathing steady, his expression cold. Vexcor stared up at him with shock and something that might have been fear. When Jake spoke, his voice carried through the corridor like ice. "Touch her again and feel the consequences." Station security arrived 30 seconds later, weapons drawn. They found 3 Krenth soldiers on the ground, 1 human standing guard over an injured woman, and a silence that felt like the moment after thunder. The universe had just learned something about humans. They had been paying attention to the wrong lessons. The security team that arrived was led by a Pentari officer named Crix. He had 4 arms, gray skin covered in fine scales, and eyes that could see into the infrared spectrum. He had worked station security for 12 years and thought he had seen everything. The scene before him challenged that assumption. 3 Krenth soldiers were down. 1 was unconscious. 1 was cradling a broken arm and making sounds of pain. Commander Vexcor was on 1 knee, his other leg unable to support weight, staring at a human with an expression Crix had never seen on a Krenth face before. And Jake Morrison stood there calmly like nothing unusual had happened. "What occurred here?" Crix asked, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, neutral words. "Commander Vexcor assaulted Dr. Blake," Jake said. He gestured to Sophie, who was still on the floor holding her injured wrist. "I responded to her emergency beacon and intervened." "Intervened," Vexcor hissed. The word came out with effort. "He attacked us without provocation. Without warning. This is assault on Council military personnel." Crix looked between them. 2 other security officers were helping Sophie to her feet, careful of her injuries. Medical had been summoned. This was going to be complicated. "I need both of you to come with me," Crix said. "Dr. Blake will go to medical. We'll sort this out at security headquarters." "There's nothing to sort out," Vexcor growled. "I demand this human be arrested immediately. He has committed an act of violence against a superior officer of the Council military." Jake didn't respond. He just watched as they helped Sophie away, his eyes tracking her until she disappeared around the corner. Then he turned to Crix and nodded. "Lead the way." They walked through the station corridors, Jake flanked by 2 security officers, Vexcor limping behind with support from his 2 injured soldiers. Other people stopped to watch. Word was already spreading through the station. A human had struck Krenth soldiers. A human had brought down Commander Vexcor himself. By the time they reached security headquarters, a crowd had formed outside. Representatives from a dozen species watched as they passed. Crick saw humans in the crowd, their faces carefully neutral. He also saw Krenth soldiers, their expressions furious. Inside the security office, Crick separated Jake and Vexcor into different rooms. He called his supervisor, who called Station Command, who called the Council Liaison Office. Within 20 minutes, this had escalated beyond a simple security incident. This was now a diplomatic crisis. Crix pulled up the security footage. Every corridor on Unity Station was monitored, the recording stored for exactly these situations. He found the right corridor, the right timestamp, and watched the events unfold on his display. He watched Sophie leave her lab. He watched the 3 Krenth soldiers intercept her. He watched Vexcor grab her, saw the blood on her arm where his claws dug in. He watched her get thrown against the wall, heard the sound of impact even through the recording's compression. Then he watched Jake arrive. Watched the confrontation. Watched what happened next. Crix replayed it 3 times, slowing it down, studying each movement. Jake's speed was remarkable, his precision even more so. Every strike hit exactly where it needed to hit. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no excess force beyond what was necessary to end the threat. This was not someone lashing out in anger. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Crix's supervisor entered the office, a tall Aldarian named Theron. "Show me," he said. Crix played the recording. Theron watched in silence, his gray face impassive. When it finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The human was responding to a distress call, Theron said finally. His friend was being assaulted. His actions were defensive. "Commander Vexicor is demanding arrest," Crix replied. "He claims unprovoked assault." The recording shows otherwise. Theron's voice was firm. "However, this will not be decided by us. Get statements from both parties. Seal the evidence. The council will want to review everything." While Crix was documenting the incident, the recording was already spreading through the station's networks. Someone in security headquarters, Crix would never find out who, copied the file and sent it to a friend. That friend sent it to others. Within an hour, half the station had seen it. The reactions were mixed. Some species, particularly those who had suffered under Krenth intimidation, watched with satisfaction. The Krenth had grown arrogant over the years, using their military might to push smaller species around. Seeing one of their commanders brought down was gratifying. Other species watched with concern. Humans had always been peaceful, diplomatic, non-threatening. This recording showed something else. It showed capability that had been hidden, strength that had been deliberately concealed. If humans could do this, what else were they capable of? The Krenth reaction was pure rage. Their soldiers gathered in groups throughout the station, talking in low, angry voices. Several demanded immediate retaliation. Only orders from their high command kept them from acting. In the medical bay, Sophie sat on an examination table while a Pentari doctor worked on her wrist. The bone was fractured, but it would heal. The cuts on her arm from Vexcor's claws were deeper than they looked, but they had been cleaned and sealed. "You were fortunate," the doctor said, wrapping her wrist in a regenerative cast. Krenth claws carry bacteria that can cause severe infections in most species. Humans too, I believe. "I've had worse," Sophie lied. She hadn't, but she didn't want to seem weak. Not now. Ambassador Chen arrived as the doctor was finishing. He looked older than Sophie had ever seen him, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders bent with weight that had nothing to do with gravity. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I'll live," Sophie replied. "How's Jake?" "In security custody. Not arrested, but detained while they investigate." Chen sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "Sophie, what happened out there tonight changes everything. Vexcor attacked me. Jake defended me. That's what happened. I've seen the recording. The whole station has seen it by now. Do you understand what Jake did?" Sophie looked at him. "He saved me. He revealed us," Chen said quietly. "For 40 years, Earth has been building a reputation. Peaceful, diplomatic, non-threatening. We've been the friendly newcomers, the ones who smile and compromise and never make trouble. Tonight, Jake showed them what we really are. And what are we?" Chen met her eyes. "Dangerous. Just like every other species that made it to space. We've just been better at hiding it." In the security office, Jake sat in a plain room with a table and 2 chairs. He had given his statement clearly and without emotion. He had acted to defend Sophie from an assault in progress. He had used appropriate force to neutralize the threat. He would do it again if necessary. Crix entered the room and sat across from him. "The recording supports your version of events," the Pentari officer said. "However, Commander Vexicor is filing formal charges. There will be a council hearing." "I understand," Jake said. "May I ask you a question, Lieutenant Morrison?" "Off the record?" Jake nodded. "Where did you learn to fight like that? Those movements, that training? It's not what we expected from humans." Jake smiled, and there was no humor in it. "Every human receives combat training. It's mandatory, part of our education system. We learn it the same way we learn mathematics or history. Why? Because we know what happens when people forget how to defend themselves. We learned that lesson a long time ago." Crix was quiet, processing this. "So all humans can fight?" "All humans know how to fight," Jake corrected. "Most choose not to. But the choice is always there." The Pentari officer left, and Jake was alone with his thoughts. He knew what was coming. The council would have to respond. Vexcor had too much pride to let this go, and the Krenth military would demand satisfaction. But Jake found he didn't care about any of that. He had drawn a line. Sophie had been hurt, and he had made sure everyone knew that hurting humans carried a price. Whether that was diplomatic or not didn't matter. Some things were more important than diplomacy. Late that night, Jake was released from security custody. No charges had been filed yet. He made his way to the medical bay where Sophie was resting in a recovery room. She was awake, her wrist elevated, watching something on a data pad. "Hey," Jake said from the doorway. "Hey yourself," Sophie replied. She moved over on the bed, making room for him to sit. "I hear you caused quite a stir." "So did you, pressing that emergency beacon." "Sorry about that. Next time I'll try to handle giant reptilian soldiers by myself." They sat together in comfortable silence. Outside, Unity Station continued its eternal rotation. Ships came and went. Species went about their business. But something had changed, shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. "Jake," Sophie said quietly. "Thank you." "Always," he replied, and he meant it. Whatever came next, whatever the council decided, Jake knew he had made the right choice. You could negotiate treaties and file diplomatic reports and smile at insults, but some lines, once crossed, demanded a response. The Krenth had learned that tonight. Tomorrow, the rest of the galaxy would learn it too. The emergency council session was called for the following morning. Every delegate was required to attend, no exceptions. The chamber was packed, with additional observers filling the upper galleries. Word of the incident had spread beyond Unity Station. Ships had carried the news to home worlds across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to see how the council would respond. Jake stood in a designated area for witnesses, flanked by 2 security officers. Across the chamber, Commander Vexcor stood in a similar position, his injured leg braced with a medical support. Between them, in the center of the chamber, Ambassador Chen sat with the other Earth representatives. His face was calm, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. Council Speaker Melthros called the assembly to order. His ancient voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "We are here to address a serious incident. Commander Vexcor of the Krenth Empire has filed formal charges against Lieutenant Jake Morrison of Earth. The charges are assault on a council military officer, unauthorized use of force, and violation of station peace protocols." Vexcor stood, his yellow eyes fixed on Jake. "This human attacked me without provocation. He struck down 3 Krenth soldiers in an unprovoked assault. This behavior cannot be tolerated. I demand justice, and I demand this human be punished according to council military law." The Krenth delegation erupted in supporting shouts. Several other species joined them, particularly those allied with the Krenth Empire. The noise filled the chamber until Melthros called for order. "Are there any who speak for the human?" the speaker asked. Ambassador Chen stood slowly. The chamber fell silent, waiting. Jake had seen Chen negotiate dozens of disputes, had watched him diffuse tensions with careful words and diplomatic compromise. But the man who stood now seemed different somehow. Older, perhaps, or maybe just tired of pretending. "Yes," Chen said. "I speak for Lieutenant Morrison, and I speak for Earth." "Then present your defense." Chen took a breath. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. "Before I address the specific charges, I need to provide context that the Council lacks. Context about humanity that we have kept private until now. We kept it private because we believed it was better to be underestimated than feared. Events have proven us wrong." He gestured, and a holographic display activated above the chamber's center. Images began to appear, historical records from Earth's past. "This is Earth 300 years ago," Chen said. The display showed cities in ruins, mushroom clouds rising into poisoned skies. "This was our Third World War. Nuclear weapons had been unleashed. Billions died. Our planet was nearly rendered uninhabitable." The chamber was silent. The images continued, showing devastation that made even the hardened Krenth delegates shift uncomfortably. "This is Earth, 500 years ago. Our second global conflict. Conventional weapons, but deployed on a scale that consumed entire continents. 60 million dead, more images. Trenches filled with bodies. Cities reduced to rubble. Weapons of chemical horror. This is Earth 700 years ago. Our first true world war. The technology was more primitive, but the death toll was no less staggering." Chen let the images speak for themselves for a long moment. Then he continued, "These are not the only conflicts humanity has fought. We have been at war, somewhere on our planet, for 95% of our recorded history. We have developed weapons that can crack continents. We have created diseases that can wipe out entire populations. We have built machines whose only purpose is to deliver death with maximum efficiency." A Aldarian delegate stood. "If this is true, why did you hide this from the council?" "Because we learned," Chen said simply. "We learned what violence costs. We learned that the strongest weapon is the one you never have to use. We came to the council as peacemakers because we know, better than any species in this chamber, what happens when peace fails." He turned to face Vexcor directly. "Commander, you called humans weak. You called us soft. You mistook our patience for inability, our diplomacy for cowardice. You assaulted one of our people because you believed there would be no consequences. You were wrong." The display changed, showing the security footage from the previous night. The entire chamber watched as Vexcor grabbed Sophie as he threw her against the wall. They watched Jake arrive and ask once for the commander to step away. They watched what happened when that request was ignored. "Lieutenant Morrison acted in defense of an unarmed colleague," Chen said. "He used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat. He showed remarkable restraint considering what he could have done." "Restraint?" Vexcor shouted. "He broke bones. He struck down trained soldiers." "Yes," Chen agreed. "And he could have killed all three of you in the same amount of time. The fact that you're alive to make these charges is proof of his restraint." The chamber erupted in noise. Species began arguing with each other, some supporting Chen's words, others calling them threats. Jake watched it all, his face neutral, as the galaxy learned what humans really were. Sophie entered the chamber, her arm in a sling, her wrist still wrapped. She had asked to speak, and Chen had agreed. Now she walked to the center of the chamber, and the noise gradually died down. "I'm Dr. Sophie Blake," she said. "I was the victim of Commander Vexcor's assault. I'd like to address this council if I may." Melthros nodded. "You may speak." Sophie looked around the chamber, meeting eyes with delegates from 100 different species. "I study biology. I compare how different species evolved, how they adapted to their environments, how they survived long enough to develop intelligence and technology. Every spacefaring species had to be successful predators at some point. You don't reach the top of a food chain by being gentle." She gestured at the Krenth delegation. The Krenth evolved on a world with massive prey animals. They needed strength, claws, natural armor to survive. Their biology reflects that. She turned to another section. The Vextar evolved in hive structures, fighting wars against other hives for resources. Their entire social structure is built around conflict and hierarchy. "What is your point?" a Vextar delegate demanded. "My point is that every species here is dangerous in their own way. You all survived your homeworlds, survived competition, survived the transition from planet-bound to spacefaring. Humans are no different. We just evolved a different kind of danger." The display changed again, showing human athletic competitions, marathon runners, mountain climbers, deep-sea divers. "Humans have greater endurance than most species," Sophie explained. "We can track prey for days without stopping. We heal faster. We adapt to environments that would kill other species. Our bodies produce adrenaline, a chemical that temporarily increases our strength and pain tolerance in dangerous situations." She moved to biological charts, comparing human physiology to other species. "Our brains are wired for pattern recognition and strategic thinking. We can plan complex operations, coordinate large groups, and adapt tactics in real time. These traits made us successful hunters on Earth. They also made us effective soldiers when we turned those skills against each other. But more than that, Sophie continued, her voice growing stronger, humans are social creatures. We form deep bonds. We protect our groups. And when someone threatens those we care about, our biology gives us the tools to respond. She looked at Vexcor. You made a mistake, Commander. You thought I was alone and vulnerable, but I wasn't alone. I had someone who would come when I called. And you learned what happens when you threaten someone a human cares about. The chamber was silent. Sophie returned to her seat and Chen stood again. Earth has been a member of this council for 40 years, he said. In that time, we have never started a conflict. We have never threatened violence. We have absorbed insults and accepted treatment that no other species would tolerate. We did this because we believed in the council's mission of peace. His voice hardened. But we will not allow our people to be assaulted without consequences. Lieutenant Morrison acted appropriately and with commendable restraint. If you punish him for defending an innocent person from a violent attack, you set a precedent that humans are acceptable targets. And that is a precedent we will not accept. Another delegate stood, an Aldarian named Kethis. Ambassador Chen, are you threatening the council? No, Chen replied. I'm informing the council. Earth will continue to pursue peace. We will continue to be diplomatic, patient, and reasonable, but we will also defend our people. If that makes us dangerous, then we're dangerous. Every species in this chamber is dangerous when pushed. We're just tired of pretending we're not. The debate continued for hours. Species took sides. Arguments grew heated. But the security footage kept playing on the display, and no one could argue with what it showed. Vexcor had assaulted Sophie without provocation. Jake had responded to defend her. The law was clear. Finally, as the station's afternoon cycle approached, Melthros called for a vote. The charges against Jake were to be dismissed or upheld. Each species would cast their vote according to council procedure. The tally took 15 minutes. When it was complete, Melthros announced the result. The charges are dismissed. Lieutenant Morrison acted in lawful defense of a fellow crew member. However, this council finds that Commander Vexcor did commit assault against Dr. Blake without provocation. The commander is stripto. 6 weeks after the council hearing, Unity Station had settled into a new normal. The changes were subtle, the kind that someone who hadn't been there before might not even notice. But Jake noticed. Sophie noticed. Every human on the station noticed. The Krenth military presence had been reduced by half. The remaining soldiers walked the corridors with more care, no longer swaggering or pushing other species aside. They still wore their armor and carried their pride, but there was something different in how they moved now. Caution, maybe, or just awareness that actions had consequences. Other changes were more obvious. When humans entered the mess hall, space opened up at the tables. Not because people were avoiding them, but because they were being given the same consideration as any other species. The casual disrespect that had been so common before had vanished overnight. Jake was in the observation deck during his off hours, watching the stars like he always did. The view never got old. The endless black punctuated by distant lights, by ships coming and going, by the slow rotation of the station itself. Mind if I join you? A voice asked. Jake turned to see a Vextar named Clixerol. He was part of the station's engineering crew, responsible for maintaining the life support systems in the residential sectors. Jake had seen him around but never really talked to him. Sure, Jake said, gesturing to the space beside him at the viewport. Clixerol approached carefully. His species looked like oversized insects with segmented bodies, multiple limbs, and compound eyes that saw in spectrum ranges humans couldn't comprehend. He settled beside Jake in a posture that might have been comfortable for his anatomy. I wanted to thank you, Clixerol said. His translated voice came through with clicking undertones that the translator couldn't quite eliminate. Thank me? For what? For what you did. For Dr. Blake, yes, but also for what it meant. The Krenth have been aggressive toward my people for years. Small things mostly. Insults, threats. Nothing worth reporting but enough to make life difficult. Since the incident with Vexcor, they have been more careful. More respectful. Jake nodded slowly. I didn't do it for political reasons. Sophie was being hurt. I stopped it, I know. That's what makes it mean something. Clixral's compound eyes reflected the starlight in strange patterns. Many species talk about honor and strength, the Krenth especially. But when the moment came, you showed real strength. The strength to protect someone weaker without expecting anything in return. They stood together in silence for a while, watching a cargo ship dock with the station's lower ring. "Can I ask you something?" Clixral said finally. "Is it true that all humans are trained to fight?" "Yeah, it's true. Everyone learns the basics growing up." "Why?" Jake thought about how to answer that. "Because we learned a long time ago that hoping violence won't find you isn't the same as being safe. We teach everyone to defend themselves, to defend others, not because we want to fight, but because we know what happens when good people can't." Clixral processed this. A wise policy. Perhaps my people should consider something similar. After the Vextar engineer left, Jake remained at the viewport. He was thinking about how much had changed, not just on the station, but in how Earth was perceived. Ambassador Chen had been right. Things were different now. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. Sophie found him there an hour later. Her wrist had healed completely, though she still wore a light brace out of habit. She stood beside him at the window, and they fell into their comfortable routine of watching the stars together. "I got approved," Sophie said after a while. "Approved for what?" "My research grant. The one I've been trying to get funded for 2 years. The Council's Science Directorate just approved the full budget." She smiled, but there was something complicated in the expression. "Funny how that works. I submit the same proposal 12 times and get rejected. Then you break a Krenth commander's knee and suddenly my research is priority funding." Jake winced. "Sorry. I know you wanted to succeed on your own merits." "I did succeed on my own merits. The research is solid. It's just that now people are actually reading my proposals instead of dismissing them, because I'm human." She leaned against the viewport, her breath fogging the glass slightly. "I'm not sure how I feel about that." "Progress is progress," Jake offered. "Is it though? Are we making progress? Or did we just trade one set of problems for another? Before we were dismissed. Now we're watched. I see how some species look at us now. They're afraid." Jake considered this. "Yeah, some are. But fear isn't always bad. If fear keeps people from assaulting our friends, I can live with it. But what if it turns into something worse? What if the Council decides humans are too dangerous to have around? Then we'll deal with it together like always." They were quiet for a moment. Then Sophie said, "Do you regret it?" "What you did?" "No," Jake answered immediately. "Not for a second. I'd do it again, even knowing how it changed everything, especially knowing that. Sophie, you were being hurt. Nothing else mattered in that moment. Not diplomacy, not politics, not Earth's reputation. Just you." Sophie reached out and took his hand, squeezed it once, then let go. "Thank you." The next morning, Jake had a meeting with Ambassador Chen. The ambassador's office was modest, with a desk, a few chairs, and a large window showing the station exterior. Chen was reviewing reports when Jake arrived, but he set them aside immediately. "Have a seat, Lieutenant. We need to discuss your future." Jake sat, wondering what was coming. "I've received communication from Earth Command," Chen said. "They want to promote you. They're also offering you a position training other personnel in defensive techniques. They want to formalize what you did, make it part of official protocol for all humans serving on Council stations." "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that," Jake said carefully. "You're exactly the right person. You showed it's possible to respond to threats without escalating to lethal force. You showed that humans can defend themselves and each other effectively. Earth Command wants to ensure every human serving off-world has those same capabilities." Jake thought about it. "What about our diplomatic image? Won't this make us seem more aggressive?" "Possibly. But I've been thinking about what you told security after the incident, about how every human knows how to fight but most choose not to. That's a better diplomatic position than pretending we can't fight at all." Chen leaned back in his chair. "We've been trying to be non-threatening for 40 years, Jake. It hasn't worked. Maybe it's time to try something else. Be polite, be diplomatic, but make sure everyone knows there's a line they shouldn't cross. And if that scares some species, then they're scared. Fear can be the foundation of respect, and respect can grow into something better. At least this way we're being honest about what we are." Jake left the meeting with a promotion and a new assignment. He would stay on Unity Station for now, but his role would expand. He would train other humans, yes, but he would also serve as a visible reminder of Earth's capabilities, a deterrent in a smile and a uniform. That afternoon, Jake was in the station's recreation area when a group of Aldarian merchants approached him. They were nervous, their gray skin showing the slight color shift that indicated stress in their species. "Lieutenant Morrison," the lead merchant said, "we have a problem. Some Krenth soldiers have been demanding protection payments from our businesses. We refused to pay, and now they are threatening us. Station security says it is a civil matter, not their concern." Jake listened to the whole story, noting details. When they finished, he said, "Give me the names of the soldiers involved and the locations of your businesses. I'll look into it. Will you help us?" the merchant asked hopefully. "I'll make sure the appropriate authorities are aware of the situation," Jake said carefully. "But I'll also visit your businesses myself, just to see if any problems occur while I'm there." The Aldarians left, looking relieved. Jake followed through, sending a report to station security with all the details. Then he scheduled himself to be in those commercial sectors during his off hours, visible and present. The protection demand stopped within 2 days. Word spread. Other species began approaching Jake with problems, disputes, situations where they felt vulnerable. He didn't solve all of them, couldn't solve all of them, but he listened and he made sure the right people knew what was happening. And sometimes, just sometimes, his presence was enough to change behavior. Sophie watched this development with mixed feelings. "You're becoming famous," she told him one evening. "Or infamous, depending on who you ask. I'm just doing my job." "No, you're doing more than that. You're showing people what humans can be, protectors, defenders, the ones who step in when no one else will." "Is that a bad thing?" Sophie thought about it. "No, I don't think it is. We spent so long trying to fit in, trying to be accepted. Maybe it's better if they accept us as we actually are." 3 months after the incident, Earth's colony request was resubmitted to the Council. This time there were no mocking comments, no suggestions that humans couldn't defend themselves. The vote passed with only minimal opposition. New Vancouver would become humanity's first official colony world beyond the Sol system. Jake and Sophie watched the Council vote from the observation gallery. When it passed, they didn't cheer or celebrate.